Hello, I'm Naya.
I'm Alex.
Today we're going to be talking about housing and economic instability. So, what comes to mind when you think of housing instability? Maybe it's homelessness, moving from place to place, or the constant pressure of not having enough to cover rent. And honestly, you'd be right. Those are all real parts of what housing instability looks like. But what we don't always talk about are the physical and the mental health challenges that come with it. According to the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, people dealing with housing instability often face high levels of stress, mental health struggles, and even a greater risk of infectious diseases. So we can see how alarming it is when Solf and other contributors state that there are 1.6 billion people that lacked adequate housing globally. And even more of a shocker, by 2030, which is just 5 years away, that number is expected to rise to 3 billion. That's nearly 40% of the world's population. So yes, something has to be done to prevent this number from rising. But we know research alone isn't enough. To really understand how to reduce housing instability and the health problems that come with it, we need to hear directly from those who have lived through it. Their stories can shed light on what actually helps when someone is in one of the most vulnerable moments of their life. Now, we may not be able to share all 1.6 billion experiences, but we can begin with two. I'll share my personal experience with housing and economic instability, and Alex will offer her perspective from working with those facing economic and housing challenges. Picture this. You aren't making enough money at your job, you have 2 kids to support, and your electric and water bills are due in a few days. You're a waitress, and the only money you have left after spending some of it on groceries is $200. How do you think you would feel in this situation? Are you stressed? Anxious? Well, my mother would tell you she felt all of those emotions during the summer of 2017 in South Carolina, when she suddenly wasn't making enough money from tips during the slow season at the restaurant she was working at. And she had to figure out how she would support my sister and I. On her way home that day, I imagine she was probably replaying one thing in her mind. She had promised we'd have the best summer break when we were with her, but when she had finally told us the economic situation we were in, we reassured her. We trusted that everything would work out because it always does. But what we didn't know was that in just a few weeks and 90-degree weather, we would have no air conditioning, no running water, and we barely had enough food, or whatever we could keep cold in an ice container. My mother's economic instability meant we didn't end up spending our weekends at Carowinds like we planned, and we never even ended up camping at Myrtle Beach. Instead, we experienced a compound of additional stressful situations on top of not having water or electricity. Our home was falling apart. There was a hole in the floor and wasps had found their way inside. My mother, she was exhausted and she was stressed. So this took a serious toll on her body, and we'll talk a little bit closer on this later. But first, let's see what a similar situation to this might look like to someone from the outside.
Even though my family never faced housing instability, I do remember facing economic instability growing up. Sometimes I had to speak with the finance office of my high school to wait for 1 or 2 weeks so my dad could pay for my tuition fees. And a couple of times, I remember my mom had to purchase food without money and requested the store owner to wait for her to pay later. In 2018, when I began to see the reality of housing and deep economic instability in the rural areas of Haiti when I was called to help with interpretation and a Chemin la Vie Meilleure, which means Pathway to Better Life program, one of the biggest programs that the Sisters of Mercy sponsor in Haiti. I saw and heard many women with children who had no homes, no jobs, and education. These children had to be on a schedule to eat because their parents didn't have money to buy food, and they couldn't go to school because their parents couldn't afford paying the tuition fees. Women and children who were sick and needed surgeries could not have the care they needed because they had no money to pay. Others delayed going to the hospital because they couldn't afford to pay transportation and medical fees. When I moved to Buffalo, New York in 2022, they took me to a family where there was no food in the home and the house itself needed to be fixed. For example, it had broken floors and dirty walls. This family included only one mother with 4 children, meaning the father was not there to support them. The mother didn't have a job. She only received support from friends and a little money she made from doing hair sometimes, and she had unstable housing subsidized. In my presence, the mother looked at her purse, counted her little money, and sent her son to buy dinner, which was fast food, like burgers and sodas. This friend who took me there usually did grocery shopping and drove to take that food to the family's place about once a month.
My experience with food when going through economic and housing instability was very similar to this. Most of the time, we were finding the cheapest ways to obtain food. And of course, it couldn't be anything that needed a microwave or oven because we didn't even have electricity. So we relied on lunch meat that was stored in an ice chest, bread and boxed foods like crackers that wouldn't spoil quickly, and every now and then we'd have fast food. But let's look at the statistics when it comes to the connection between food insecurity and housing instability and how these challenges coexist and exacerbate one another. So according to Ashbrook, 2024, 10.4 million renters, and that's about a quarter of all renter households, are spending at least half of their income just on housing, leaving them with little money left over for basics like food. And this helps explain why in 2022, there was 44.2 million people that were living in households facing food insecurity.
In the book of Social Epidemiology by Bertman and other colleagues, they mention employment, loss of jobs, decreasing hours of work can influence health outcomes, well-being or quality of life, social identity in a number of ways, depending on duration and prior health status and socioeconomic struggle. That means someone who loses their job for 1 or 2 weeks and another person who becomes unemployed for over 2 months could be impacted differently. It also depends on how much they expected their loss of jobs or to be unemployed, their needs and obligations.
So my mother is actually a living example of this. I had mentioned earlier that we experienced food insecurity as a result of economic instability, but the negative effects that come from food insecurity isn't just about lacking enough food. Davidson 2015 states that food insecurity is associated with adverse mental health outcomes like anxiety and depression. So during the time we were facing economic and housing instability, my mother, she ended up having a MRSA flare-up, which is an infection she was carrying after spending so much time in and out of hospitals with my brother who had passed away a few years before. But it wasn't stress that directly caused her MRSA flare-up. It was actually her weakened immune system. So according to Alaudaby 2024, stress triggers the HPA axis, which raises cortisol levels, and over time, it can actually weaken the immune system, which can increase susceptibility to infections such as MRSA. Cockerham 2013 even says that when people are constantly exposed to really unpleasant environments, their bodies go into frequent stress mode, which is also known as the fight or flight response. And this basically sets off a chain reaction in the body where systems like the autonomic and the neuroendocrine kick in to help handle the perceived threat. So your heart rate, your blood pressure, and even your digestion get affected.
According to Eamon Judy and other colleagues who work on human capital, they mentioned that human capital has been shown to directly impact health outcomes, and investments in human capital have always been raised as one way to decrease social inequalities. The Pathway to a Better Life program is a great model of investment in human capital that empowers and tackles housing and economic instability in the rural areas of Gaumont, Haiti. Throughout the program, the Pathway to a Better Life, case managers assess the lives of the families to choose who can best fit or the most needed. They evaluate housing, ownership, access to education, healthcare, food, water, and economic activities related to source of incomes. During 18 months, the case managers work mostly with women, about 200 women and children, in some cases with widowers, meaning men who lost their wives, or disabled fathers with children. The package of this program focuses on building human capacity and confidence by including financial support to the woman to have a house or repairing as needed, training on business management and saving, opening a bank account, basic writing skills, providing the health care the family needs, sending children to school, and helping to own their own micro enterprises. For example, can be animal husbandry, having a food store, selling other stuff. The case managers constantly check the progress and support the families who struggle and help everyone to succeed. The case managers and leaders do an assessment of the progress to qualify the success of each woman in different aspects of the program. The in-country leaders organize a graduation party for all participants and give them a certificate. There's a continuous assessment with the families after the graduation, as well as offering them other programs for personal and community development. For example, learning in technology, construction of water cisterns so they can have water directly from rain when they have the rainy season. One lady who was kicked out of a place because she couldn't pay her rent went back to the same area and bought a piece of land after graduating from the Pathway to Better Life program. She also grows her business from selling juice to selling trucks of plantains in a public market in Gomorrah.
As for my mom, with the help of friends and family, she finally moved back to our hometown a little under a year after a situation in South Carolina. She ended up finding a stable job, and she moved into a safe neighborhood, and she's been there for a little over 5 years. But not everyone has the kind of social support my mother had, especially today, as cuts to federal programs like the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families have left many single mothers more reliant on informal networks of family, friends, and community resources, as Martin West 2019 points out. On top of that, the National Low Income Housing Coalition 2020 wrote that the growing shortage of affordable housing has made it even harder for single mothers to maintain housing stability. And that leaves many families to depend on these informal support systems to avoid eviction. And as we know, housing instability, especially with no support, brings many challenges.
These challenges can mean such as having trouble paying rent, overcrowding, moving frequently, or spending the bulk of household income on housing. Households are considered to be cost burden if they spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and severely cost burden if they spend more than 50% of their income on housing. Cost burden households have little left over each month to spend on other necessities such as food, clothing, utilities, and healthcare. Black and Hispanic households are almost twice as likely as white households to be cost burdened. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, housing instability in 2019 included about 37.1 million households, including renters and owners, were cost burdened. Of these, 7.6 million households were severely cost burdened. Here we are today with millions of people in America and other countries continuing to be deeply impacted by housing and economic instability, while a small group of families own trillions of dollars.
So it's important that we continue to bring awareness to this issue and that we create real solutions. As Alex had mentioned earlier, the Pathway to a Better Life program is a great example of how we can reduce housing and economic instability in rural Gomorrah, Haiti. Programs like this help local families build stronger foundations and offer a model for other rural communities facing similar challenges. Here in the U.S., we can focus on affordable housing, better rental assistance, and increasing the minimum wage. Programs like the TANF and SNAP help families make ends meet, and local efforts like eviction prevention programs, they can go a long way in keeping people housed. But when we think globally, expanding affordable housing programs and increasing rental assistance can make a huge difference. Things like raising wages and providing income support allows families to pay rent without sacrificing other essentials. To end this podcast, we want to make it clear that the more we talk about these issues and advocate for meaningful change, the closer we get to ensuring that everyone, no matter where they live, has a stable place to call home and the chance for a healthier, more secure life.